Mark Shaw has been here twice, and I have read the book that he has presenting tonight, and it is beyond awesome, and it's hard to make me impress me. This book is something. Mark has been a legal analyst for CNN, ABC, and USA Today. I wouldn't argue with him because you'll lose. If you would, turn off your cell phones and pagers and so forth, because this is being recorded for future broadcast on the social media, and that will interfere with the document. Mark Shaw.
Thank you very much for having me here. And as I said, I'm going to give a lot of credit to the Allen Library for having me twice and now a third time, because an awful lot of the videos on YouTube that they put up through their channel have made a lot of difference to my research, and especially for the new book. So let's get started here. You saw the endorsement from Nick Pileggi there. It meant a lot to me about the book, but let's get on to here. And this is the woman we're going to talk about tonight. And this is the woman that should be talked about in any book that ever has anything to do with the JFK assassination. And I will tell you right now, if her research, her investigation of the JFK assassination is not included in that book or that film or anything, they are worthless. Worthless. And I'll explain why. Who was Dorothy Kilgallen, okay? Here's some quotes about her. The New York Post called her the most powerful female voice in America. Ernest Hemingway said, the greatest woman writer in the world. A colleague of hers on What's My Line, and we'll tell you about her being on that show, when Dorothy went after a story, nothing could help her, nothing could stop her from finding the truth. When she died, Bob Considine, who was a famous columnist at the time, said, there were two Dorothy Kilgallens, three really, if you count the Dorothy Kilgallen of What's My Line. In the latter role, she's one of the best-known women in America. Chic, witty, trenchant, and an absolute master of ferreting out the truth. There was Dorothy Kilgallen, the voice of Broadway, and we'll talk about that column of hers. Saucy, provocative, and superbly informed about what was happening in the worlds of the theater, cafe society, criminal trials, Hollywood, TV, Washington, London, Paris, and Timbuktu. The image of Dorothy as a journalist who drove up to assignments in a Rolls Royce, which she did now and then, cannot evaporate in any reporter's mind the memory of her hard-working, scrappy, dogged determination as a reporter. She became as famous as most of those people she was covering. And the final tribute to her that I would give you, and you'll finally learn that I, at one point, practiced law with the famous F. Lee Bailey. He said of her, she was a very bright and excellent reporter of criminal cases, the best there was. So, what do we know about Dorothy? I'm just going to go through a little bit about her, and especially this first part of my presentation, because I want to get to the material in Fighting for Justice. That's Dorothy's ancestors in Western Ireland. My wife and I were privileged to go to the politics of something or another. They called it in Dublin a couple years ago, and we learned where she was from. That's Dorothy in the 8th grade up there on the right-hand side. That's Dorothy as a cub reporter. And that's Dorothy in 1936. There was something called the Race Around the World. Two reporters, one from the New York Times, one from the New York Daily News, and Dorothy from the Journal American, made a race around the world only using commercial transportation. You know, no jets, none of that kind of thing. They used the railroad, they used the ships, they did all that. Dorothy set records for that in terms of how quickly she got around the world. Okay, this is what Dorothy's most famous for, isn't it? For those of you who don't know, that's Dorothy on What's My Line. Quiz show guessing the unusual occupations of people, okay? Every Sunday night on CBS at 10 o'clock live, more than 10 million people watch that show. Now, that may not seem like a lot now, but it was then. And Dorothy was the prosecutor-like person. She was asking all the tough questions and all of that. Okay, this is Dorothy at her best. Not only did she cover the coronation of Queen Elizabeth, which she won a Pulitzer Prize nomination for, but she talked and you talk about being trusted. And that's a lot of what I've tried to learn from Dorothy about, how to be trusted, because she had the best sources in the world, especially about the assassination. She talked the Queen into letting her go, and this is in Fighting for Justice, with the Queen when she had her first hair permanent. Now, that may seem like a little thing to you, but that shows the trust that there's Dorothy at the coronation, and that's Dorothy with guess who? What? Ernest Hemingway. All right, let's move ahead. Okay, Dorothy was a reporter. College dropout, wanted to be a reporter like her father, James Kilgallen, who was an award-winning journalist. In fact, not too long ago, I found out that her father was one of the, I believe, the first newspapermen to have exposed the existence of Dachau during World War II. So the heritage that she had, as you can imagine, rubbed off on her. And one day he came home, she had started off to go to college at New Rochelle, and she said, "Dad, I don't want to go to college, I want to be a reporter like you." That's what she became at the New York Journal-American, which was a big newspaper at the time, probably like the New York Times almost. And she wanted to be a reporter there, and so they gave her a trial run for 6 weeks, and she lasted until she died in 1965 at the age of 52. Fearless, covered criminal trials a great deal. One of the best parts of that story that I know about, at one point the editor decided to kind of challenge her about what kind of reporter she could be. "Send her to the morgue. Let's see how she handles things in the morgue," the editor said. So they sent her there. Well, as you can imagine, she was looking at all the dead bodies, suicides, and everything. And all at once, the person that was with her, one of the other reporters, knew she was going to fall on the floor and hit her head. So they gave her, I guess, some, I think a popsicle or something like that, and got some sugar to her, and she was able to survive that. The other story I love is she was at Sing Sing prison, witnessing, at that time, an execution. She came outside. A man came up to her and stuck a gun in her face and said, "I'm so upset about what you wrote about in your column, your Voice of Broadway column about my sister." And Dorothy stood her ground, and this is validated by a couple other reporters, stood her ground, talked to him, got him to drop the gun, and left. Larry King, when I talked to him about Dorothy and what he said she was a gutsy woman. Well, she was a gutsy woman, that's for sure. Okay, where are we? Let's move ahead. Oops, what happened here? Okay. Dorothy Kilgallen, before she covered the Jack Ruby trial, she had plenty of experience with high-profile trials. She was at the Charles Lindbergh baby kidnapping case, right in the front row. At one point, there was a situation where they had to have somebody babysit with Mrs. Lindbergh because she was so upset about everything that had happened. And Dorothy was the one that sat with her. In the courtroom, she tapped Bruno Hauptmann on the shoulder and said, hey, I'd like to talk to you, before, of course, the lawyers wouldn't let her. Gutsy woman, that's for sure. And then she covered the Dr. Sam Shepard case. And you may remember what television show? The Fugitive, all right? And this is an amazing story because she went to that particular trial. There's all kinds of accounts in the new book as to what happened, including a new one about how much popularity she had there. It happened the same situation with the Jack Ruby trial. At the Lindbergh case, the judge asked her to come in. Well, I've watched you on What's My Line, and can I get your autograph? And so she went to the judge's chamber and gave an autograph. And then this shows who Dorothy Kilgallen really was. All of these photographs of Dorothy and video of her talking about on the Edward R. Murrow show, being a newspaper woman is my favorite career of all of my careers, and all of that are on the DorothyKilgallenStory.org. And that website is given in the book. That's Dorothy in the middle of the courtroom. Just look at her. All the other reporters, and there's some famous ones, Walter Winchell and others of the day, admiring dear Dorothy. So the first book became The Reporter Who Knew Too Much. And I had some tips, again, as to what to do with that particular book. We really couldn't find a publisher for it. Nobody thought anybody knew about Dorothy because, as you'll see, when she died, she kind of disappeared from the face of the earth. But I found a publisher, the same one I've used for the last 3 books, and this book just finally took out. And everybody fell in love with Dorothy, and everybody watches the reruns of What's My Line and all of that. And if there's nothing else that I'm more proud of than kind of just bringing Dorothy back to life, because she had disappeared for a long time. In this book, I did something I hadn't done in any of the other books. I've written 6 books touching on the JFK assassination, and people around the world who send me emails and everything, about 5,000 emails I think we have. There are 7.5 million views, YouTube views of my presentations and so on. They get in touch with me. And they said to me, how'd you do this? How'd you do this? Because many of them, especially people that knew me in my early life, know that I'm just a guy with average intelligence at best, all right? I never was anybody that was very impressive with regard to my intellectual abilities, so I decided to take the reader back a little bit to who, at the beginning of what happened with me. If we could get this done here. Okay, I don't know why that's not coming up. There we go. Okay, now you may think this is a pretty stupid photograph to do. This is me at Purdue University my freshman year. And that's my fraternity class. And I put that up there because I have no idea of why I'm all by myself, okay? But that's indicative of very much of an independent streak. You're going to see in a little while when I became a criminal defense lawyer, people were scared to death of me because I'm a man of the truth. And I search for justice just like Dorothy Kilgallen. But this is when it started. I've never been afraid to go out and try to find new information that will lead me to the truth. That's my mother and father relaxing because I almost dropped out of Purdue University. It was too big for me. I'm from a little town in Indiana, Auburn, where they made the old cars. In fact, people say my books are easily read, which I appreciate, but they are because I don't have a big vocabulary. I'm not being humble, believe me. That's my mom and dad relaxing because after almost 6 years, I graduated from Purdue. They thought I would never get out of there. Okay, come on, please. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong or... The right arrow. There we go. Okay, well, what happened to me? After Purdue University, I got a job up in Minnesota, got fired, moved to Chicago, ended up bartending at a nice bar there, and my parents wondered what I was going to amount to. But anyway, I got into law school at Indiana University and ended up becoming a criminal defense lawyer. On a Friday, I didn't have a job. On a Monday, a friend of mine got me a job as a public defender, and I tried my first case, a murder case. The man was charged with killing his girlfriend from 6 feet away with a shotgun in front of her children. Okay? I tried that on a Monday. I went to the jail, and this guy named James, that was his name, said to me, well, Mr. Shaw, have you tried any cases and things like that? I said, well, I took a class in law school. And obviously he was very concerned, which he should have been. But then I started taking on these cases. And this is a case where I ended up starting to get some publicity because of my clients. This was a case where a black man was charged with killing a white policeman in Indianapolis. And it was a huge case, and he took off. And so that's his mother in the middle of me and the police chief trying to get him to what? To go ahead and turn himself in. The Indianapolis Star got a kick out of me and compared me, if you that are old enough to remember, Petrocelli, the legal case on television, where he wore the rumpled sport trench coat, which I wore. His office looked like it was a college office. By the way, you'll see on the left-hand side, I actually, for the first and only time in my life, tried a mustache. It did not work at all. My life has been magical in many ways. I've been so blessed with so many things happening to me that I don't know if they happen to other people or not. I call them defining moments. This is one of them. A doctor outside of Indianapolis got charged with murder. There was a DEA agent whose body was found bobbing on a cement slab in the middle of a farmer's pond. They believed that this Dr. Lind, that was his name, was responsible because he had figured out the doctor was dealing drugs. That particular doctor made the best phone call of his life. He called F. Lee Bailey, the famous lawyer, Patty Hearst case, Dr. Sam Shepard case, all of these different, the Boston Strangler, all of those. And F. Lee Bailey then made a phone call, and I don't want to take too much time, but you'll get a kick out of this. I was a Strawberry Boone's Farm wine drinker at the time. I think it was about 69 cents a bottle. And we had a party after another. I'd had a string of victories in murder cases, and we were celebrating. The phone rang. Mr. Shaw. I said, yes. This is F. Lee Bailey. I said, well, yeah, sure. And why don't you just come on over? We'll have fun. It rang again. I picked it up. He said, Mr. Shaw, this is F. Lee Bailey, and if you hang up, it'll be the dumbest thing you ever did. Lee Bailey, who will figure into my life in a little bit in a different way, hired me as his co-counsel. And we tried that case for Dr. Lind. He was also charged with an unusual situation for a doctor. He had a basement full of submachine guns at the time. So they charged him with both of these crimes. And the first time that Dr. Lind came to my office, I look over at the entrance and I see these two people standing there, Dr. Lind and his wife. They're holding their shoes. And he whispers across, my shoes are bugged. So I'm thinking this is going to be quite an experience. So we get over on the couch, and I sit between the Linds, and he takes out a grocery receipt, and he's got all these questions written on it. He asks me all these questions, and I say, well, Dr. Lind, listen, we know they're going to arrest you. You can't carry around things like that. So I go back over to my desk, all right, and I'm getting him a business card, and I look up, and here's what he's doing. He ate the notes. True story. Lee Bailey and I tried that case together. They couldn't convict him of murder, but they went ahead and they were able to convict him of the submachine guns. And unfortunately, in Mississippi, they couldn't suspend his license. And the last I knew when I left Indianapolis was he was still practicing medicine, which is very scary. That's me with the last case that I tried as a criminal defense lawyer. That's a terrible job in many ways. The drama of the courtroom's amazing. But there's no winners in a criminal case. Obviously the victim, but also the perpetrator. Their life is over as well. So this was a young kid that I represented who shot a social worker point blank, just a senseless crime. And I'd had a good string of victories, and I won this one. And he was acquitted. And a reporter from the Indianapolis Star came up and said, Mr. Shaw, what do you think? What are you going to do now? And I said, I quit. And she said, what? I said, yeah, I'm done. That's it. I'm done. And so I did. I packed my stuff in at a car, and I moved to Colorado because I said, this is enough of doing that. So where do I end up? Well, I had spent some time in Aspen, Colorado. So I moved out there, and for some of you who've already noticed the resemblance, the first thing that happened is everybody thought I was John Denver. And there's some good stories with that. For instance, I would get somebody to come up and say, Mr. Denver, would you give me your autograph? I said, I'm Mark Shaw. No, you're not. Yeah, I'm not. Yes, you are. They say, would you just sign this program or this napkin or something? And so I would go ahead and sign Mark Shaw. But I knew they would go back to Des Moines or wherever it was and say, I got John Denver's autograph, but he signed it Mark Shaw. All right. So this was the first big case I ever tried, and for many of you, you won't even remember it. Andy Williams' wife, Claudine Lager, shot Spider Savage, who was a famous skier at the time. And Lee Bailey was supposed to cover that trial, and he couldn't. And I was blessed. Another defining moment, he called me and said, would you like to do this? And Good Morning America hired me to cover that trial. Now, most people who get in the television arena, trial coverage, whatever, start at the bottom with a small station in a small town. I started at the top. They sent me to Aspen. I covered the trial. I was the only one. And this is kind of where I felt like that the trust in me was growing, the same kind of trust that people had at me when I defended them. I didn't care if they had any money or not. I defended them the best I could. Claudine gave me the only interview she ever did about how she accidentally pulled the trigger and killed her boyfriend, Spider Savage. In my opinion, by the way, she was not convicted of murder, but she should have been. Okay, so then we move on. And that man on the left is Angelo Bruno. And why do I bring him up? Because as you're going to see, I will, with Dorothy's help, I have shown, in my mind at least, there was only one man who had the strongest motive to have killed JFK, a New Orleans gangster. This is Angelo Bruno, a powerful head of the mafia in Philadelphia. And Good Morning America sent me over there to interview his attorney. Well, that was a shocker because, as you can imagine, those people don't want anybody talking about anything. So I went over there, I interviewed him. He told us some things about Atlantic City gambling and everything else, and we were shocked. It was on GMA the next morning, got a huge audience. The producer said, go see if you can interview him again. So I went over there, or I didn't over there. I got on the telephone, I called, an assistant or a secretary answered, and I said, is Mr. Such and Such there? Quiet, silence, nothing. And then she came back on. I could tell she was crying. And I said, hey, are you okay and everything? Well, I guess she said, you don't know. When my boss started his car this morning, it blew up and killed him. Nick Pileggi, who gave me the wonderful endorsement for this book, said to me at one point, when you deal with the mafia, Sicilian, whatever, their middle name is revenge, and they can't let people open their mouth with the code of silence. So they killed him. You can't mess around with those guys, and that'll play in when we start being involved in the JFK assassination. Why did I put these two pictures up here? Because I covered the O.J. Simpson case. In fact, I was on the air on ESPN when he was driving his Bronco, remember that, around L.A. for whatever reason. That's Nicole Brown Simpson and O.J. And I'm not bragging again. I just want you to know that I was able to go to a party out there, and there they were. And when that woman walked into that room, it was like the sun shone on her. She's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my life. And I just want to bring that up because that's the tragedy of a woman like that, with everything that's going on in her life and all of that, being killed. And if you want to know, for sure, O.J. Simpson, in my opinion, and Lee Bailey's opinion, who represented O.J., that he was guilty as hell. That's Kobe Bryant. If you're a basketball fan of Kobe Bryant, you're not going to like what I say, because I covered his rape case in Colorado. I sat right in the front row. Bryant came to the hearings like he was going to the beach, just like it was no big deal. He was charged with rape, as you remember, of a young girl at a hotel up there. And I listened to the evidence that they had in the preliminary hearing, and it was so substantial. And then his attorney had the audacity to release the name in public of the victim. And the victim, was so scared and everything, she ran away. They finally settled the case. In my opinion, based on the evidence I heard, Kobe Bryant was a rapist, and he should have gone to prison. No question about it in my mind. Here's the case that really changed things as far as my writing career went. I covered the Mike Tyson trial. Now, I should tell you, people always have wondered, my books are easily read, but how in the world did I even write them? I've written almost 30 and published almost 30 now. Well, I write like I talk to juries, okay? That's where I learned to write. I had no fancy classes or anything like that. I learned to write by talking to juries. I try to talk to the reader, give them the information, stop and think books and all of that. But I covered the Mike Tyson trial, and I was the judge asked me to look after the media, and I did that, and then I sat there and I worked for ESPN and for ABC and USA Today and watched this trial. How would you like to be Mike Tyson and you don't know any better, and your promoter, Don King, who had just finished a tax evasion case in Washington, D.C., decides that a tax evasion case, if he can win my case, he can probably win a rape case, even though he had no experience with criminal trials. Well, it was the worst defense I've ever seen. For instance, the first thing he did in his opening statement, Mike Tyson will testify. You never do that. You never want to tell the jury that that's going to happen, because you may not want it to happen. Here's Tyson's defense. He's the worst, awful, terrible, violent person in the world. And the woman should have known better to have invited him up to her hotel room. That's the defense he had. And what do you think? Without hardly any evidence otherwise, they said, yeah, he is the worst human being on the face of the earth, the most violent. We'll send him to prison. Should have never, ever happened. So I was upset. I wrote the first book, Down for the Count, 1992, my first book at 47 years old. And, again, all along the way here, there are recollections of what Dorothy would do if she were me in these situations. And I truly believe that she would have written a book like that, or she would have covered it with regard to that. All right, this is Melvin Belli. For those who don't know, King of the Torts. He was one of the most famous attorneys with suing pharmaceutical companies, getting million-dollar verdicts and all of that. I practiced law with him in the mid-1980s. And I learned some things about Belli that really bothered me. That's him. The second photograph there is the one that, you get clues in your investigation. That's what Dorothy did. She found the clues and then she would follow them, and what she found there would take her to the next thing. And that's what's happened to me with my research through the years. That's Melvin Belli. The guy in the middle, that's Mickey Cohen, one of the most notorious, dangerous mafiosos in the country from L.A. He and Belli were best friends. I never knew that when I practiced law with him. But when I found that out, I thought, wait a minute, this connection with the mafia really bothers me. I don't know what's going on. Then we have the assassination of JFK, and we have Ruby shooting Oswald. So then we get to the whole situation with the question I asked, and I think you would have asked too. How does a personal injury lawyer who's never tried a capital murder case in his life end up representing Jack Ruby? Makes no sense whatsoever, if you can imagine. And I started to look into that. And one of the things you're going to hear about Dorothy Kilgallen is, I hear all this Oswald alone stuff, and it's fine, and if they want to do that and go that direction, fine. Dorothy never did that, as you will see. She thought that Jack Ruby, and you'll hear why, was the key to solving the JFK assassination. But when I found out about Belli's involvement with the mafia, I thought, I want to go back a ways. So I went back to the 1960 election. Now here's what you're going to remember what I found out. Joe Kennedy, who wanted to be president himself, and couldn't be for a number of reasons, including being very close friends at one time with Adolf Hitler, decides he wants his sons to be president. And I'm not exaggerating here. He thought it would be Joe Kennedy Jr. for 4 years, JFK for 4, Bobby for 4, Ted for 4. He really did. But JFK is up, isn't he? And he runs against Nixon in 1960, right? And it's really close. So Joe goes ahead and gets some help from a real scoundrel, but a friend of JFK's named Frank Sinatra. And Sinatra puts him in touch with Sam Giancana in Chicago, Carlos Marcello in New Orleans, Sandro Trafficante down in Florida, and they help win West Virginia and Illinois so JFK can become president. And in doing so, Joe made a deal with the devil. You help us get in the White House, we'll leave you alone when we're in the White House. Well, do you think that happened? Of course it didn't. The very first thing, and I have an eyewitness who was there, I don't speculate. I use primary sources, and when any hearsay is there, as we'll talk about in a little bit, I use confirmation of that. In this situation, I had a distinguished journalist who worked for Bobby Kennedy at one particular point, who was right at a breakfast when Joe Kennedy ordered JFK to appoint Bobby Kennedy Attorney General. Okay? Well, that scared the hell out of the mafia, the double cross, because Bobby had hated the mafia. The McClellan racketeering hearings, he made fun of them, and Sam Giancana are giggling like a little girl, and you all have the slicked back oiled hair, and he hated those guys, and the mafia knew right away there was a problem. And what did Bobby Kennedy do? The first thing, What's the first thing he did? That's Joe and Robert Kennedy. Two of the worst human beings that ever lived, in my opinion. Evil people. And we'll show even more why. What did he do? He takes the kingpin mafia guy in New Orleans, Carlos Marcello, and he sends him to the jungles of Guatemala. Imagine that. And Marcello gets back in the country. And then as you keep going with the thread here that I found, we're now going to get into Dorothy Kilgallen and her JFK assassination. Okay. That's where she is. That's Dorothy Kilgallen. That's JFK and Dorothy. Why did Dorothy Kilgallen get involved in the JFK assassination? It's amazing. I don't know how many of you know the term crowdsourcing, but it's only been recently that I gave a presentation in San Francisco, and the gentleman that ran that at the Commonwealth Club said, "You're a magnet for crowdsourcing." I said, "Well, what's that?" He said, your book's out there, Mark, your videos on YouTube, everything. That's why you've gotten all this information coming to you. And you take that and then you go with it with your research and so on and so forth that way, okay? So what I found out from a tip was Dorothy Kilgallen was a very close friend of JFK. In fact, a What's My Line producer said, he recalled the night he and Kilgallen returned from a Broadway opening and are sitting in her home office. The phone rang, he said, and it was very late, 1:30 in the morning. It was Ted Sorensen, special counsel to the president. No small potatoes. They were talking, I heard Dorothy say, oh, really? Say hello to him, too. Jack Kennedy had walked into the room, asked who Sorensen was talking to, and when he learned it was Dorothy, said, say hi for me. JFK had been to her home on East 68th Street. Remember, Dorothy Kilgallen is one of the biggest names in the country as far as her visibility went. Oprah and Diane Sawyer and all that, they couldn't hold a candle to what Dorothy was at that particular point and what she accomplished. So he'd been to her home for charades. He'd seen her at watering holes and so on and so forth. And then the most important thing happened. And this is why she got into the JFK assassination. She took her son, Kerry, I don't know if that's the next, no, we'll get back to that, Kerry, to the White House. He was in the 3rd grade. Pierre Salinger set it up for the little boy to meet the president in the library, if you can imagine. And he had letters from his 3rd grade class. And JFK made a big fuss over it, gave him a PT 109 pin and looked at the letters, all that kind of stuff. Imagine what that meant to Dorothy and also to little Kerry. So when JFK was shot, she wrote in one of her columns, this Voice of Broadway column that covered crime and all different kinds of things, she wrote, what I remember is a tall man stooping over a little boy, making a fuss over the letters he brought from the 3rd grade class. This is the man who was killed in Dallas. And that launched her investigation. There she is at that time, the picture of her. That's her in Dealey Plaza, okay, proof she was there. This is the first column that she wrote about the JFK assassination. The Oswald file must not close. Now, everybody else in the world is going with J. Edgar Hoover, who's shouting, Oswald alone, Oswald alone, Oswald alone, except for Dorothy. She didn't buy it. She couldn't believe, and in the Oswald alone column, the first one she wrote, she said, nobody's going to make me believe that in a big town like Dallas, some guy that owns a bar can walk into a basement and shoot somebody who's the most important prisoner in U.S. history, and on and on and on and on. And then she scared the hell out of Hoover and anybody else who was involved in the JFK assassination with that particular statement. Justice is a big rug. When you pull it out from under one man, a lot of others follow. A lot of others fall too. Dorothy was making enemies right then, okay, in 1963. And as you'll see, those enemies continued on. What'd she do next? Oops. Okay, who's Dorothy Kilgallen with right there? Melvin Belli at the Ruby trial. She was so smart, you see. And my dad used to tell me, if you're not as smart as somebody else, we'll find somebody that is smarter than you are and somebody that you can rely on. And that's what I did with Dorothy when I started finding out about her. So God bless her, she has guided me all the way through my research. Well, that's her with Melvin Belli because she was on to Jack Ruby. That's the key here. And she spent time with him, had lunch with him, all that kind of thing. There's Ruby. What did Melvin Belli come up with? These defenses of people drive me crazy, okay? Tyson, all these other ones, they're so ridiculous. But here's what Belli used. See if you understand this. Psychomotor epilepsy insanity defense. Exactly. Nobody could figure that out. If you look, and we're going to talk about the Ruby trial transcripts in a minute, nobody could understand what that meant. But he was brought into that case to do two things. Make Ruby look crazy and never let him testify, which he didn't. And when we get later to the whole trail that Dorothy had set up as the most common thread as to how the JFK assassination happened, you will see what that all means. And the jury did what? They found him guilty. She had interviewed Jack Ruby with this at the trial, okay? She's the only one to have interviewed Jack Ruby at that trial out of 400 reporters. She and Jack Ruby, by the way, the most popular program on Sunday night at the Carousel Club, What's My Line? He used to watch that and watch Dorothy. He had a lot of respect for her. So he asked his co-counsel there to talk to Dorothy about the fact that he'd like to talk to her out of 400 people. She interviewed him twice. And then she wrote this column about it, Nervous Ruby Feels Breaking Point. Dorothy Kilgallen may have been one of the greatest investigative reporters, but also one of the finest writers that ever lived. Her wordsmith views, wordsmith skills. If I could write as well as Dorothy, I would have had 10 bestsellers instead of just the one with the reporter who knew too much. Just listen to this prose about Ruby. Jack Ruby's eyes were as shiny brown and white bright as the glass eyes of a doll. He tried to smile, but his smile was a failure. When we shook hands, his hand trembled in mine ever so slightly, like the heartbeat of a bird. Ugh. Feel like you're right there, don't you? Talking to Jack Ruby. And there's some more of that too. And co-counsel Joe Tannehill's observation was, Ruby told Kilgallen the truth as he understood it about the assassination. So what did Dorothy do then? All right? People want to know, all right? We don't know what she said, what Ruby said to her. Because I'll tell you right now, something ahead. On the morning that Dorothy died, very close to when she died, J. Edgar Hoover sent his agents to her home and they confiscated all of her JFK assassination documents. They've never been seen. Tragic, very tragic. As far as what she didn't go to Washington, D.C. to look into the military complex. She didn't go to Cuba. She didn't stay in Dallas to look into LBJ, so on and so forth. She went to New Orleans. And who did I say before was at New Orleans? Carlos Marcello. That she looked. She went there. There was a communication with her hairdresser that I'll mention in just a minute. But what she was able to do, and I think I've proven this in my previous books, especially in this new one, she connected Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby, and Carlos Marcello. And it's most interesting because lately I've gotten two accounts, one by a very respected Dallas resident, as a matter of fact, Kathleen Lieberman, who's here tonight, who talks about and gives a story that's in the book about when she was very young. Her grandfather, she came to see him from Tulsa, and she would go to his home. And at one particular time, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, you can talk to Kathleen afterwards, but there was this man who came. He was short, he was very well-dressed, which describes Marcello. And at one point, he was there and asked whether she would like to go with him down to the Adolphus Hotel near where JFK was killed. And so she went with him. And Kathleen will tell you that when they got there, she looked around and she wasn't sure who these people were because they were so young. And then all at once, she saw a guy over at the table with Marcello. And she will tell you that later on, she knew that was Jack Ruby. That's a first-hand account. There's a man named Dudley Allen who's here. And unfortunately, I didn't find out about his information until I had written this book. But he talks about an incident in Waco, Texas, when he was a young boy. And he will give you, he will present in the paperback version a verified account of the fact that he was able to put together Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby, and O.L. Nelms, who was a famous, a very wealthy Dallas resident who ran the, which one did he, anyway, had a nightclub, and the nightclub had been rented by Jack Ruby at times and that kind of thing. So there's two accounts that we've never had before, and I think both of them are very reputable. Okay, where are we here now? All right, then Dorothy made a big splash. She made a big splash, and she made even a further enemy of none other than J. Edgar Hoover. Okay, so what I'm thinking about is what did Dorothy do next, all right? Because that's what Dorothy would do with this information like Kathleen had or other information about going to New Orleans and everything. Well, what she did is she decided she wanted to get the testimony at the Warren Commission by Jack Ruby. And so she was able to get it, and we'll explain why in a little bit because I never knew until February of this year. She printed Jack Ruby's Warren Commission testimony on the front page of the New York Journal-American. And it was like the exposing of the Pentagon Papers or the Nixon tapes or the Snowden NSA secrets, okay? This was a big deal. And it's even a bigger deal when you figure out what we're going to talk about. This will all come around to when we talk about the corruption at the Warren Commission. But Dorothy, put that on the front page. Because you can imagine, J. Edgar Hoover, who's in charge of the Warren Commission, is not happy about this. So I love this visual. And this letter is from J. Edgar Hoover to the chief counsel for the Warren Commission. And it's asking the chief counsel, where in the hell did she get the Warren Commission testimony? And so what they do is they send these two, we'll come back to this in a minute. All right, they send these two big, tough agents to Dorothy Kilgallen's home in Manhattan, and they interrogate her about where did you get these documents and everything. And Dorothy goes ahead, and you'll see what she said, and we'll come back to that in just a minute. So, what has Dorothy done? Well, she's made the enemies. Certainly Marcello couldn't be happy about what she had discovered. I think he was aware of that, and Hoover and all of these people. So what happens next? Well, Dorothy is dead. Dorothy she told people she went to New Orleans to meet someone who is going to give me information about the case. If it's the last thing I do, I'm going to break the case. I'm going to break the real story and have the biggest scoop of the century. Well, she was a blabbermouth. And she shouldn't have been when she went back to New Orleans, or went back to New York City. Mark Sinclair on the right was her chief hairdresser. He went with her to New Orleans to take care of her hair and everything for photographs and stuff like that. And she called him at the hotel and said, go back to New York City, don't tell anybody you were here with me, and don't ask me any more questions about the JFK assassination. And then she said, I'm afraid for my life and my family. I'm going to buy a gun. Charles Simpson, her other hairdresser, she knew she was in danger. If the wrong people knew what I know about the JFK assassination, it would cost me my life. And it did. On November 8, 1965, she was found in a bedroom in her Manhattan home. She never slept in that bedroom. She had on her eyelashes, hairpiece, and makeup. She was wearing something like she was going out on a date. Mark Sinclair found her and knew she was dead. The police came, found an empty bottle of Seconal pills, which are sleeping pills, nothing else, and decided she'd overdosed on drugs with the verdict, overdose of drugs, circumstances undetermined, which it makes really no sense if you think about it. Go watch the last episode of What's My Line? Sharp as can be. Guesses the occupation. No slurring. She never had any kind of drug problem. But they just jumped to that conclusion, and Mark Sinclair is the one. Kilgallen died of that. Okay, so what did I do? Well, I wanted to find out more about this. I couldn't get her autopsy report at the New York Police Department because I'm not a member of the family. What would Dorothy do, I said? She'd go to the National Archives. And there was her autopsy report. 1 barbiturate in her system? No. 3. Phenobarbital, Tulinol, and Seconal. 3. All right, that's the first thing that I found. And then two of the medical examiner toxicologists they save back there sometimes people's bodily fluids, and they did more tests. And not only did they find the 3 barbiturates, but they found out that on a glass that was right next to her bed, okay, there were remnants of those barbiturates on the rim of the glass. And they concluded that somebody had taken capsules and gone ahead and emptied them and poisoned Dorothy's drink, which was vodka and tonic. This is the woman who This is Catherine Stone, who was on What's My Line that night. She saw Dorothy with an unidentified at that time man at a hotel where Dorothy met with him. And I have corroboration of that in the book. And she talked about those two being together. Well, we finally were able, through my investigation, to find out that the guy on the right is Ron Pataki, who was a journalist in the Midwest looking to get ahead, and so he ended up having a romantic relationship with Dorothy, who was estranged from her husband. And I found out more about Pataki. and the fact that through an eyewitness who I found in Las Vegas could tell me that Pataki had gotten in trouble with some kind of trouble, gambling problems, it seemed like, and that for whatever reason then he was compromised, and we believe by J. Edgar Hoover's FBI agents, into leaking the information that Dorothy was going to put in a book she was writing for Random House about the JFK assassination. The Oswald alone thing was crazy, all the other stuff that she had. And by doing that, he put her in danger, obviously, by giving out that information. That's Ron Pataki on the right with Dorothy. And then he did something that when I started investigating him, that I couldn't believe on his website. This is a poem that he wrote. Vodka roulette seen as relief possibility. Okay? So you can read that. That's what, when you're a prosecutor, who are you looking for? You're looking for somebody that knows the facts only the killer could know. Ron Pataki was involved with her death for sure. So, also, Jill, Dorothy's daughter, my mother was murdered. And I have other accounts of that in terms of exactly what happened to Dorothy. But I've proven in the books that Dorothy was murdered because she was, in fact, the reporter who knew too much. She knew too much about the JFK assassination, and those who couldn't let her write her book for Random House had to silence her. 10,000 people showed up for Dorothy's funeral. If you imagine that. There's even one woman who showed up that said there was her building was on fire, and Dorothy rushed in and saved her baby. Okay? So now I've got all that, and I'm going to quit. I think that's enough. And then another crowdsourcing situation happens. A lawyer down in Fresno, California gets a hold of me and says, I've got something for you, Mark. I've got the Jack Ruby trial transcripts, and I felt like a dumbhead. Why didn't I ever look into those transcripts? I didn't. I should have. That's me reading them, 2,000 pages. I read every page. And it was amazing because that then became the next book, Denial of Justice. The Ruby trial transcripts are gold. They're up on my website, markshawbooks.com, if you want to see excerpts. But here's what was in there. Now remember, Dorothy Kilgallen's in the front row at the Ruby trial, right? So she hears the testimony there of Jack Ruby and so on and so forth. But she also heard this, that there was a witness who testified he had heard Jack Ruby on the telephone just very, very close to when he went over and shot Oswald. What did Ruby say? I will be there when the transfer takes place. I'll make like a reporter to get in, and I'll get the help from the Dallas Police Department. All right? Now she sees the conflicts you see between the Ruby trial transcripts. She didn't see that in the Warren Commission Warren Commission testimony by him, and it conflicts with what was there at trial. Okay. So very quickly, we move on to, there's the testimony. Now we move on to this. Again, I was going to quit. Enough books, Mark. But people kept asking me in these emails and everything, is there a connection between the deaths of Marilyn Monroe, JFK, and Dorothy Kilgallen? Remember, Marilyn Monroe 62, JFK 63, Dorothy 65, 40 months of each other. And I said, no, there isn't. I don't think there is. I don't think that Marilyn and Dorothy knew each other that well. Well, I was wrong. That's Dorothy on the left, or Marilyn on the left. By the way, that's her with her dog she had just gotten before she supposedly committed suicide, which makes no sense whatsoever, as I will tell you. We'll go through this pretty quickly because that's in Collateral Damage. That's Dorothy with Marilyn and Yves Montand, a French actor on 20th Century Fox. And then this is the column that made all the difference in terms of what was going on with Dorothy, or with Marilyn. MM as Hollywood talking again. I thought, well, this doesn't, what's going on here with Marilyn? Did she commit suicide? And then I read this column. Marilyn's on the upswing. She has a love interest who's more important, is a bigger name than Joe DiMaggio, the Yankee, the Yankee slugger, Hall of Famer, who was her second husband. She's getting Broadway offers. She's getting movie offers. She's getting this. She's just, got a dog. She got a new house. She got all these things. I'm thinking, that doesn't sound like a woman who would commit suicide to me. So I started looking further into this. And the first thing I said to myself was, who's a bigger name than the baseball slugger? Well, that's Marilyn singing to JFK on the 45th birthday at Madison Square Garden. If you get a chance, go in and listen to it. It's quite eerie to listen. And then that's afterwards. Who's on the left? Robert Kennedy. Who's on the right? Jack Kennedy. So I'm thinking, aha, Jack Kennedy may have been involved in her death. But that love, if they had a relationship, and it's still fuzzy if they did or not, Joe Kennedy put a stop to any of that because JFK is going to run for office again, and he doesn't want any of this sleazy stuff with Marilyn Monroe. So I think, well, what about Bobby Kennedy? And then I get another aha moment. You know, all of this has been out there. And other reporters, other so-called experts, authors, Oliver Stone, for God's sakes, all of them, they dismiss all of this. They don't even include Dorothy Kilgallen or Marilyn Monroe's death in their investigations. This was in plain sight at the National Archives. It's a CIA document, okay, the day before Marilyn died. And what does it show? First of all, it shows that J. Edgar Hoover was wiretapping the phones of the Attorney General and Marilyn Monroe, and that they both had interests, along with Dorothy, in UFOs and all of that, all right? And then you get down to numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5 there. And you know, this is what is so disturbing, that they missed this as far as Marilyn went. Subject Marilyn repeatedly called the Attorney General and complained about the way she was being ignored by the President and his brother. Now you're going to see the second part of that on the right-hand side. Bobby Kennedy was involved with Marilyn Monroe in what the right side says is a, torrid love affair, whatever it is, with Marilyn Monroe in the summer of 1965. Remember, she dies in August, or 1962. She dies in August. In fact, it's so strong, it says in there, that Robert Kennedy has told Marilyn he will divorce Ethel and marry her. Now they won't answer her damn phone, their damn phones. And so I have this visual in the book where Marilyn, who Dorothy wrote a column about how much she wanted to find love in her life, how much she wanted to have a child, all of that kind of thing, sitting by the phone, calling these two powerful men, the Kennedys, and they won't return her calls, and tears are streaming down her face. I don't think that's a stretch. They dumped her. And so she started talking about they're treating me like a piece of meat and all of that. And then number 3, subject threatened to hold a press conference and would tell all. And that would have been worse. That would have been bad enough. Okay, that would have disturbed their reputations and all of that. The poor Kennedys, you know, and the womanizers that they are. In this book, I have a book called The Kennedy Neurosis, 1973. And I used it because it was close to the assassination and all of that. It talks about how the Kennedys, based on neuroses and their influence by their father, each became a sexual predator. It shows very directly how that happened. They were terrible womanizers. And the worst part of that book is how they treated their wives. You know, Joe Kennedy used to take his mistress, the actress, I can't think of her name right now, but the actress that he had as a girlfriend to the home where his wife was. No respect for women whatsoever. But this is the one that killed her. Subject made reference to bases in Cuba, that's Marilyn, and knew of the president's plan to kill Fidel Castro. It doesn't take any brain to figure out what. They can't let her go to the media and tell all that information, can they? No way they can. Marilyn was dead at that point. And so I kept looking into exactly. Now there's Bobby Kennedy, and I put that picture up in the middle because not only is he cheating on his wife, he's cheating on what'd they have, 12 children? Just talk about no morals whatsoever in these Kennedys, none. And that's poor Marilyn. And by the way, if you think she was a dumb blonde, you're completely wrong. Go buy a book called Fragments with her poetry and writings in there. She read Ulysses. I tried that, and it got about 6 pages. I mean, she was smart. She was a very smart woman. That's a letter in the middle from John Steinbeck winning her autograph. And on the left, that's Ella Fitzgerald. Marilyn loved people. She loved to help people. Ella Fitzgerald couldn't get a gig on Sunset Boulevard because of who she was, her color, all of that. And you know what Dorothy did? She told Ella Fitzgerald, you tell that SOB that I will be in the audience every single night that you perform. And they let her, the only reason they let her perform is that Marilyn Monroe was there every single night. Also, 2 films about Dorothy have recently, or about Marilyn have recently came out. The Blonde, I think, was just done, and there was another one on YouTube. And it's just deplorable. They just, destroy her reputation up and down the way. She was a whore. She was this. She was that. Just terrible stuff. In Anthony Summers' book and his Netflix film, he even got presented pictures of her autopsy. And he used files that he got somehow or another from her psychiatrist, violating the psychiatrist's patient privilege, just like the Kennedys. No morals at all. Okay, so what had I proven up to then? With regard to Marilyn, what I found out was, and I think it's true, there's based on primary source evidence. Bobby was in L.A. on August 8th, 1962. He and Peter Lawford landed, even though he said he was in San Francisco, he wasn't. I proved that. He was landed at 20th Century Fox Studios in a helicopter. He and Peter Lawford went to Marilyn's home and begged her not to go to the media. She refused. And I have 2 new accounts in the book as to how she was murdered. And you will see that basically Bobby Kennedy used his associates or whatever it was, and they came to the home. There was a window left open. They came in there, and it's not the nicest thing to say as to how she was killed by the injection of barbiturates into her system. No investigation. Guess why? The Kennedys were, as you will see with the Warren Commission corruption, great at cover-ups. Joe Kennedy was the best. And what did they do? They enlisted the police chief in Los Angeles, Parker, very close friend of Robert Kennedy's. And what'd they do? No investigation, never interviewed anybody at the crime scene. They appointed 3 psychiatrists who they controlled, who said that Marilyn was in bad mental straits and was using drugs and things like that. Case was done. So again, Mark Shaw was going to quit. And it's fascinating because I had started to think about the Warren Commission in some ways as to what was going on. And we'll take this we'll take about 15 minutes here and 20 minutes and go into to what I found in Fighting for Justice, and then you can see what you think when you look at the book. All right, so I was interested in the Warren Commission, but I was a dumbhead. I never looked into a lot of that. And why didn't I? Because it was just like with J. Edgar Hoover's Oswald alone deal. You believed him. It was this nut, okay, that did this. Nobody else did. Now, over the years, that's changed, but I believed him. And so with the Warren Commission, I believe that when they came out with the Oswald alone verdict, conclusion, as I'll mention here in a minute, that they were telling the truth. Well, you'll find out they weren't. J. Edgar Hoover had an obsession with Dorothy Kilgallen. Not only because of the events that took place, with the Warren Commission testimony and so on and so forth, but right from the beginning, she wrote a column where she interviewed Jesse Curry, the police chief in Dallas. And again, remember, she's got the best sources. And what did Curry say? No, I didn't send my police to the book depository building. I sent them to the overpass. On that document I found in the National Archives, in capital letters, okay, it says, wrong, 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 wrong. He had been after her since the 1950s, put an informant in one of her social clubs. He was obsessed with Dorothy Kilgallen. And so she'd been under surveillance for several years. Well, I got to thinking about, let's look into the Warren Commission. Well, again, through crowdsourcing, and I believe it's somebody who watched the very presentation in 2019 that I had at the Allen Library on denial of justice. And you're going to see in a little bit how much that meant, but this is the first thing that I found where somebody had watched. I think there's 2.5 million views of that presentation. It went viral. And this gentleman got in touch with me and he said, well, Mark, you must know about the LBJ Hoover audio tapes before they convened the Warren Commission. I said, well, I don't. He said, well, I'm going to put you in touch with them. And so I was able to go ahead and start looking at those. And here's what was happening. In a little bit, I'm going to get after this 6th floor museum at Dealey Plaza because it's just a shrine to Oswald and just distortions of history every single day for visitors that go there. But here's what J. Edgar Hoover and LBJ decided. Okay, well, we've got to have an investigation of some sort, but we certainly don't want it anyplace else. We don't want it in Dallas. We don't want it in Washington, D.C. We don't want it in Congress. So we're gonna convene a commission. And if you look at these this is a conversation they had on. I got the wrong one here. This is 11/29/63. I thought I had here. Where is that? All right. Well, the first one was on 11/29/63, and what they talk about is who they want, who they want to look at in terms of having on a commission. But also, we're going to have the commission so that there won't be one in Congress, there won't be in Texas. We want to control everything that's going to be talked about. And it goes on into talking about, well, the subject matter has to be Oswald alone. That's all they cared about at that particular time. And then this one is on 10/31/1964. So they're setting this all up, and they decided they're going to stack the deck with those members who they know will go along with the Oswald alone conclusion. So in this one, they're talking about the people that they might... let's see. This is J. Edgar Hoover. Oh, well, this has got the wrong date on it. I'm sorry. This is the one in 1963. As you can see, they're saying I think it would be very, very bad to have a rash of investigations. We got to be careful because we get a bunch of television going and so on and so forth. It would be a three-ring circus. All right. So they didn't want that to happen at all. And this is the second one in 64. You'll see, they go down through people that they think they might want to have. For instance, you go down to, they're talking about one particular man that might handle the liberal group. And that's going to be the commission member we're going to talk about in just a little bit. He's a pretty judicious fellow. He's a pretty liberal fellow. And then they go through people they don't want. Jacob Javits of New York. He might get involved with the media. We don't want anybody like that going to the media of any kind. The one that stuck out, though, another aha moment, was this one. During their conversation, they're talking about something bad happening with rumors and so on and so forth coming up, and that it's going to happen the next Tuesday. And so they're saying basically, I think, of course, we get nearer to next Tuesday. I think the likelihood of this rumoring going along that they can't prove and not be able to prove, unless, of course, someone, one of these dirty columnists is very apt to cover something in her column. Well, who can that be other than Dorothy Kilgallen? Okay, so the Warren Commission. We don't need to go through all of the members, but this is them when they convened it. Just a minute here. Let's see what they do with that. Okay, and you would recognize a lot of the men. Gerald Ford was on there, CIA Director Allen Dulles, Richard Russell from Georgia, the man we're going to talk about in a minute, Hale Boggs from Mississippi. So they get this convening. It's 7 white guys, which includes Earl Warren, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, okay? These are the guys that they want. Then the report comes out, okay? And what does it say? Well, basically, it just says Oswald alone, Oswald alone, Oswald alone. No connection with Ruby, nothing else. This is it. This is what we found through all of our investigation, that we had. And then Dorothy speaks up again. A personal reaction to the Warren Commission. Well, if she's got J. Edgar Hoover mad at her before, she's going to get him even more upset with her now. Because in the Warren report, remember what was at the trial where Ruby admits that the police are going to help him get into the Dallas basement. In the Warren Commission report, no connection between Ruby and the police at all. Nothing mentioned about the police in there and all of that. So what does Dorothy do? Well, she's smart enough. She goes back to New York City and she checks with some of the people that she includes in her columns, singers, dancers, comedians and all that, because a lot of them appear at the Carousel Club. And basically she goes ahead and she proves in this column that many New York variety acts who worked in the nightclubs operated by Jack Ruby in Dallas say they weren't a bit surprised at the revelation that Ruby and the local police were chummy. So chummy, Ruby was allowed to hang around police headquarters while they were questioning Lee Harvey Oswald and so on and so forth. Now Dorothy knows some more information, and she's put it out there, and it's putting her in more danger all the time. Okay, here's where I want to thank these three individuals here, Kevin, Aaron, and Tom Keener, for having me at the Allen Library in 2019 for the Denial of Justice presentation. Because in February, I get a chill every time I think about this. I get an email from a guy who says, Mr. Shaw, I just watched your presentation at the Allen Library, and I saw the name Dorothy Kilgallen. I knew her. Well, my ears perk up, obviously. Please call me. I call him. Well, this particular man, yeah, please, okay. This particular man is Morris Wolf right there. And he starts telling me things, but I decide, okay, I'm gonna, after he tells me what you're going to hear, which is the most important evidence ever secured about the JFK assassination. And I don't say that with any reservations whatsoever. It's the most important information exposing the shocking, the startling, whatever you want to call it, alarming government corruption maybe in the history of the United States. And here's why. Morris Wolf, who was he? Well, he's an outstanding man. He a Yale lawyer, and he worked for Bobby Kennedy, he tells me. And he worked for him in the Justice Department. And he worked for him when JFK was in the White House. And Mr. Shaw, he says, they used me as a go-between. I would run back and forth or take my bicycle between the White House and the Justice Department and exchange messages between them because they were worried that J. Edgar Hoover would tap their phones. Just imagine that. The President of the United States and the Attorney General. And J. Edgar Hoover and Bobby Kennedy hated each other. It was a terrible situation. And I did that, Mr. Shaw. And then you know what? Oh, and I found out more about him. He had, this is a book that Morris Wolf wrote on the right. Whatever Happened to Raoul Wallenberg? Well, you don't know who that is probably, but he was a Swedish individual who was given credit for saving about 100,000 lives during the Holocaust. And Morris Wolf, with no payment, when Wallenberg was in prison in Russia, went back and forth and tried to get him out of prison. And at one point he had it done until an advisor to the president named John Roberts, that name you'll remember, John Roberts you'll recognize, got the politics involved in it and everything else, and unfortunately Raoul Wallenberg spent the rest of his days in prison. So, what does Morris Wolf start telling me? He says there's a commission member that I worked for as a legislative assistant for 2 years. And I was with him during the Warren Commission hearings. And he was a member of that commission. And Mr. Shaw, I used to ride with him. You can imagine the reaction that I had to this, riding as fast as I possibly could. I rode with him in his Saab to the Warren Commission hearings. He's a very tall man. He had to kind of squeeze in there. But we talked during that time. And also, I sometimes was allowed to wait for him in the back of the Warren Commission hearings room and listen to the hearings. And here's what he told me. The commission members already know about the Jack Ruby connection to organized crime, but they don't want to touch it. Now that one will come around even more. They already know about the Jack Ruby connection to organized crime, but they don't want to touch it. It's more than Oswald, but J. Edgar Hoover and Chief Justice Warren keep pushing the Oswald alone conclusion. Our new president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, now wants to cover up and move on. They want to bury the truth under a pile of stones. The commission members say this this is the one that drives me crazy. This is the rationale for this bogus Warren Commission report, Oswald alone. They say this Oswald alone conclusion is good for God and country, but there is internal corruption, and I don't know why. I have offered my resignation. They already knew about Jack Ruby and organized crime. They knew about all of this. But they're protecting themselves. And we'll talk about why they were doing that and why they this is like reporters and journalists today who come up with a conclusion and then somehow or another they exclude everything that doesn't fit with that conclusion. That's exactly what's going to happen here, as you will see. It's despicable. Sorry. Okay, so who is that Warren Commission member? Senator John Sherman Cooper of Kentucky. And here's what Morris Wolf says to me, and you're going to see how I corroborated a lot of the things he said. He said, Mr. Shaw, you may want to go into the internet, and you can do it, go into the internet and look at the photograph of the Warren Commission giving the report to LBJ. You will see that every single man there is standing by himself for the most part. They don't look very happy too much anyway. There's no smiles or anything, but they seem to be okay. Look on the right-hand side and see a commission member that's hiding behind another. That's Senator Cooper. He's next to Allen Dulles and Hale Boggs of Mississippi. He was so disgusted with regard to what was going on with the JFK assassination, if you can call it that. Okay, so where do we go there? Well, I wanted to know about Senator Cooper. You would have done that too. Dorothy would have done that. What kind of a man was he? Well, I found all kinds of tributes to Senator Cooper as a man of honor, as a distinguished senator, as this, as that. But I thought this was the best one. And this best one is from Jacqueline Onassis. That's after JFK was dead. And what does she say? Cooper, this is an article that she was interviewed for. He was a man of great character. She compared him to another Kentucky leader, Abraham Lincoln, noting his ability to connect with individuals from small town Kentucky to communities. It's a question of character, really. If a man seems to you wise, profound, compassionate, intelligent, so on and so forth, you look up to him. Then he was also loved. He couldn't help but be loved. If you just spent 15 minutes with him, you'd like him. That corroborates the kind of man that John Sherman Cooper was. Okay, so there he is with his friend, President of the United States. John Sherman Cooper and his wife Lorraine were the first couple to be invited to the White House when JFK was inaugurated. Those are pretty strong credentials, aren't they? Okay? And that's why he's so upset with the commission. JFK's his close friend, and he knows they're not even coming close to finding the truth of what happened. All right, more corroboration of something this big. I had to go to extra lengths to corroborate it all. All right? Confirmation of Morris Wolf's account that Cooper was dissatisfied is proven through an oral history of the taken of the senator, it's his own words, at the University of Georgia. And, he talks about in there how upset he is as far as the commission situation went. And then here's one of the most important things. It changed the history of the United States of America regarding the JFK assassination if something that Senator Cooper and Senator Russell of Georgia demanded would have been in the final report. They demanded a dissent, a minority report, be added to the commission report specifically rejecting the single bullet theory, the one bullet that struck JFK and Connally and so on and so forth, and rejecting the Oswald alone theory. That dissent was promised to Senator Cooper when he got the particular, when the report came out, it wasn't in there. They lied to him, just like they lied to the American people. One of the biggest lies in American history. All right, so then things just kept steamrolling, okay? Oops, what happened here? We're going to go back to this. Remember I told her that Dorothy Kilgallen had the Warren Commission, Jack Ruby Warren Commission testimony. How'd she get it? Well, I'm talking to Morris Wolf, and I said, tell me about, you said you knew Dorothy Kilgallen. He said to me, yeah, Mr. Shaw. Now, think of the odds of this happening. I don't know why I get this stuff. It just somehow or another comes to me. He says, yeah, I knew Dorothy. I used to go to parties at Senator John Sherman Cooper's home in Georgetown at N and 29th Street, which is important. And I would be asked to go because I was a bachelor and they needed bachelors. And guess what? I sat right next at the dinner table to Dorothy Kilgallen. She was a bright light bulb. She was an investigative reporter, kind of like while she was having her salad. I mean, she was trying to find out what I knew about Senator Cooper and everything. Investigative by nature. Okay, so I hear all this from him, and I just couldn't believe it. And so I said, well, I have to ask you a question then. Is it Senator Cooper who gave her the Jack Ruby Warren Commission testimony before it was supposed to be released, based on the fact that Dorothy was very congenial and a woman of integrity who pursued the truth, characteristics of the senators well. I have no problem stating that because of the problems of the commission taking what he called was a shortcut and a rush to judgment, his admiration for Dorothy, it made good sense that he was instrumental in secreting the Ruby testimony to her, knowing she would go forward with the truth. That's how she got it. And I never knew that. And there's been a missing piece to my figuring out why Dorothy was in such danger in 1965. But we're going to fill in that missing piece in just a minute. Or we can even talk about it now. Because now what does Dorothy know? She's writing this tell-all book for Random House. She knows Jack Ruby's testimony at the trial doesn't mix with what's in the Warren Commission testimony. She knows now about the situation with getting that testimony and all of that. She knows about Marilyn Monroe's death being orchestrated by Bobby Kennedy. She's got all this information, and you have to know that Hoover and whoever knew about that as well. And now I'm able to say that not only did Morris Cooper give her the information that Cooper gave Dorothy the Warren Commission testimony, but that he also told her about the corruption. Just think about what danger she's in now with all that information, and here's little Dorothy, and she's going to go ahead and put that in her book. More danger than I ever realized she was in. And you can go back to this FBI memo about Kilgallen being interviewed by the FBI. She was so smart, okay? Sure, if it was Cooper, and it seems like it was Cooper, then here's some of the answers she gives. She either refuses to answer, or she gives an answer. For instance, she said the source was a responsible person, had a legal right to the transcript. She refused to provide a date she received it, as well as the city where she inserted. It was a friend of hers of long standing who gave her the transcript as a friendly gesture. And then this is the capsulized integrity of Dorothy Kilgallen. I would rather die than give up my sources. That's the kind of woman she was. And she wouldn't give up the identity. And I think the identity was Senator John Sherman Cooper. So now we know that. And then in the book, you're also going to read about the fact what the Kennedys decided to do. See, J. Edgar Hoover could not, he had to have the Oswald alone theory, the Oswald alone conclusion. If it's a plot to kill the president, then he can be responsible. If it's a nut like Oswald, he can't be. I was able to find that LBJ only wants the Oswald alone conclusion because there could be an investigation of his involvement in JFK's death. I found a KGB document where the Russians believe that LBJ was behind JFK's assassination. Earl Warren doesn't want to have anything to do with anything other than the Oswald alone conclusion. We had 7 old white guys who decided to deceive the American people in the world with regard to the Oswald alone conclusion. And the Kennedys, well, the Kennedys don't want any investigation. They don't want anybody to go back and look into the 60 election that they fixed. And Bobby for sure doesn't want him to go back and look into his complicity in Marilyn Monroe's death. I should say this, by the way. Think about this. If Bobby Kennedy would have, I think Marcello is the one that orchestrated JFK's death, and I've proven that, to make Bobby powerless, which is exactly what happened, by the way. Bobby Kennedy never bothered those people again. If Bobby Kennedy would have been prosecuted in 1962 for his complicity in Marilyn's death based on the compelling evidence of the time, there would have been no JFK assassination because Marcello would not have had to kill JFK to render Bobby powerless. He would have already been powerless. And Dorothy Kilgallen would have never been killed because there would have been no JFK assassination for her to have investigated. All right, and just a couple more points of interest about Cooper. on his senatorial paper. Warren and Katzenbach know all about the FBI, and they apparently and others are planning to show Oswald the only one to be considered. To me, this is an untenable position. I must insist on outside counsel. That's how upset he was about everything going on. This is his letter of resignation. He did not send it, Morris Wolf said, because he wanted to stay loyal, but he had it there. Look at all the possible exposures of the Warren Commission corruption. It goes all the way back, you can read in the book, to 1964, 7, all the way through present day. CBS did an investigation of the Warren Commission in 1967. They said they traveled 125,000 miles, interviewed thousands of witnesses. You know what they said? The Warren Commission got it right. They got it right. Okay. And there's that picture again. All right, now this will just take a few minutes, but because there's not enough nasty words that I can say about the sixth floor museum over here at Dealey Plaza. These people deliberately lie to everybody that comes in that museum. They distort history. The exhibits are 5 years old. The audio is even older than that. It's an Oswald shrine. They will not allow anybody else's book other than those that are about Oswald alone. Not mine, not anybody. They've refused to let me talk there. They've refused to let any other viable researchers talk about it. I sent them a copy of this book. I sent them another nasty letter telling, close your damn doors. I invited them here tonight, okay? And yet they just continue going on with deceiving the public. It's just despicable. And somebody's got to have enough guts in this city to go ahead and put them out of business. It's Stephen Fagan, it's Lindsay Richardson, it's the whole group over there, and it's the Dallas Historical Society that keeps perpetuating the Oswald alone theory. The Warren Commission knew what they were doing. They deliberately deceived people with the Warren Commission report. That's exactly what these individuals do. Humanizing JFK. Well, you know, Marilyn Monroe, we learned about her, we lost her. How about JFK? We don't know what would happen in the future. This is 60 years since the best moment in his life, in my opinion. 60 years since he saved the world from possible nuclear disaster, right? With the Cuban Missile Crisis. All right, 60 years since then. But he hasn't gotten the justice he deserves because they covered it up, okay? They could have shown the plot to have killed him, but they didn't, and he hasn't gotten the justice. You know, when I was an attorney, I had clients. I take these cases on like Marilyn's my client, Dorothy's my client, JFK's my client, and I fight for justice for them. And this improbable journey of mine has taken me everywhere, but I'll continue to fight for justice for them. This almost makes you cry when you think about it. Marilyn could never have a child. Dorothy was a mother of 3, and she could never enjoy time with her family or do anything else. What do you think would happen if she had lived? If she had lived and put all that material in the book for Random House, J. Edgar Hoover might have been indicted, Marcello as well. They all got away with that because Dorothy was silenced. Well, what about JFK, the 2 little ones there? He never got to know anything about them. And in the book, there is an interview with Jackie shortly after JFK died, and she'll talk about the children, and it'll make you cry. Here's Dorothy with Carrie, the one that went to the White House. Dorothy had guts. She defended Lenny Bruce, who was the outspoken, nasty-mouthed comedian in New York City, and she didn't care for what he said, but she said he had a right to say it. She battled Frank Sinatra. They battled back and forth. He wrote terrible things about her. She wrote terrible things about him. But she was strong enough to fight back against one of the sleaziest characters who ever lived. So this is the whole situation that I guess I call for some reason, I don't know, this is a little bit audacious, but the Kilgallen-Shaw report. The way the assassination works is common sense. You know, I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago. I had to just say I'm hanging up. because they were getting into all of these, who shot who in Daley Plaza and how many shots. And there, at the time, there were some people in Georgia raising money to shoot Oswald. I don't care anything about that stuff. I'm a Dorothy believer. And what did she believe? The most credible reporter to have ever investigated the JFK assassination. She was at the Ruby trial. I wasn't. All these experts weren't, but she was there. And what did she figure out? She interviewed Jack Ruby. She went to New Orleans. She knew that Marcello's empire extended on to Dallas. In fact, he had two underlings there, Joe Campisi, one of whom is the first person to visit Jack Ruby in jail. He set it all up. Then you have, and then you have Jack Ruby killing Oswald to silence him, and then you have Melvin Belli coming in to basically silence Ruby by showing he's crazy and won't let him testify. That's how the mafia does things. That's how they do. They close all the doors. And that's what Dorothy believed, and that's what I believed. These are my books. These are my contributions to history. And I hope that my research, and it has in some situations, spurred other research. I'm not saying that I have all the answers. I'm saying that based on my research and Dorothy's, I think there's an awful lot of plausibility to them. So, that's my story. It's interesting to me because, thus far at least, I've never had anybody who's come forward and just said, Mark, you're an idiot. Now, they may have thought that, and it's very possible they did. But here's the relevance, and it's going on today. They didn't ask the right questions in the 1960s about these three deaths. They didn't ask any questions. And I know I really fault the media back then for that. I mean, they could have easily gone ahead and looked into those things and changed what happened. They didn't ask the right questions. We're not asking the right questions today. You can't take anything on surface value anymore, from journalists, politicians, anybody. But it's your own fault if you don't ask the questions. Now, I invited tonight here a number of journalists in Dallas. Michael Granberry from the Dallas Morning News, Skip Hollingsworth, Techless Movie Monthly, Allison, D Magazine, Patrick Williams, Dallas Observer. And I believe the only one who showed up is maybe Mark Smith, if he is here. But what happened is they don't care. They don't care about any of this. I sent them the book. I told them I'd send them the books. I gave them a capsulized version of what I had found. They don't care. And that's the problem that we have with the media. It's just very, very unfortunate that they don't really want to go ahead and do their job. And people love Dorothy. I get all these love letters for her in my email and all of that because she was a woman of intent. How many people have said, we wish we had a reporter like Dorothy Kilgallen today? And about 2.5 weeks ago, I got one of the biggest surprises of my life. And that was an email. And think about how humble this is for you who know who this person is. Mr. Shaw, I am a singer-songwriter. My name is Judy Collins. And then she went on to talk about Dorothy and how much she admired her and how the press, the media, no investigation, all of that, just so upset with regard to how Dorothy has been treated, how she was treated back in 1965, and her reputation ruined because they said she overdosed on drugs, which was so far from the truth. So it's amazing to me, this woman. She has her footprint on everything having to do with the JFK assassination and with Marilyn Monroe's death. And yet, many people still, refuse to even include her in the conversation. I don't care if they include me in the conversation. If they don't want to, that's okay. But Dorothy's research is the best. And I hope tonight you've seen information about substantiation for what a remarkable woman she was. She was a woman of the truth. And if they wouldn't have killed her in 1965, we would have found out exactly what happened with the JFK assassination. Thank you. I think Tom's going to come up here and we can take any questions.
Mark, go ahead and have a seat.
Okay.
I'm going to ask the first question. Was there any hint that J. Edgar Hoover found out that John Sherman Cooper was the leak? I know you found out through other means, But it seems like if he had found that out, he would have done something with John Sherman Cooper. I will have to say, both sides of the aisle highly respected him.
Yes, they did. Can you hear me? Okay. I don't think he did. You know, they had a code of silence. I've got a letter from LBJ to the members, basically saying, shut your mouth. You don't talk about this to anybody. Now, I'm not a big admirer, frankly, of John Sherman Cooper, because he should have spoken up. They all should have spoken up at some particular point. Jerry Ford, future president. I mean, none of them spoke up. They just let it go on. And so, no, Tom, the answer is I do not believe he knew. Dorothy kept it secret, and I think John Sherman Cooper took it to his grave.
She must have kept it in her head, not in those notes.
Not that we know of.
Okay, questions, comments, protests?
Thank you so much for coming. Very, very interesting. A couple of questions. One is, and maybe I missed it, but did you confirm that Oswald was one of the shooters? And how deep or wide was his involvement in that? And two, if you could just touch on briefly, why was Hoover so much wanting to cover this up and just all of that?
Sure. Well, with regard to Hoover, you know, he had a lot to lose because it was Oswald alone. You know, right away when the assassination took place, first thing he did, and it's all in the book, it takes about 3 pages to outline exactly what he did after JFK died. You know, sends a memo to the Justice Department. We must convince the American people it is Oswald and Oswald alone and nothing else. He sent a second one there. He right away, what did they do? I mean, the autopsy for John Kennedy should have been in Dallas. That's where he died, right? But he went ahead and corralled all of the medical information that they had when he died at Parkland Hospital and whisked it off along with JFK's body to Washington, D.C. I don't know if you know the name Dr. Cyril Wecht, but he's one of the most acclaimed forensic scientists in the world, in history. He sent me a nice note about this book the other day. He said he's never seen a worse autopsy. It was like fiction. He said it ought to be in the fiction part of a library because it was so. They were 3 inexperienced, I believe they were Air Force surgeons who did that autopsy. It was just Navy, maybe, okay, yeah. And so, you know, that was just crazy as far as that, but he was obsessed in all that. With regard to Oswald, Dorothy decided he was a dead end. You could take 10 years of a talk in here and go into everything about Lee Harvey Oswald. But he was just, you know, there were 2 Oswalds. Well, one was in Michigan, or in Mexico, and then the Russian connection, and so on and so on and so on and so forth. The only thing I know is that, you know, Dudley Allen out here saw Oswald along with Ruby at one point, and that Marcello had the capacity to have had them connected in Dallas. But as far as whether I believe he was probably part of the soldiers that Marcello would have used to assassinate JFK. But you know, one of the most honest statements by anybody in the whole JFK assassination may be the one where Lee Harvey Oswald is standing by himself in a T-shirt and says, "I've been used as a patsy," or whatever it was, because he was the perfect patsy. He really was. There were all these dead ends, but Dorothy never bought that, see? I never found anything in her columns really, like the first one, the Oswald file must not close, but then it went right into Jack Ruby because she believed that was the key. Does that answer your question okay?
She was more interested, yes. To ditto what he said, her focus was on Ruby.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for all the information you gave us. In my opinion, this crime really cries out to heaven. And it's very sad to see how President Kennedy was smeared. They smeared his image. Every book you can find about him, it just make him look very bad. I have 2 questions. First, if they wanted to get rid of Bobby, why didn't they kill Bobby instead of killing the president? Second, if you wanna,
Just a minute. Stop there so I don't forget what you ask. I should have said this. Okay, if Marcelo's a smart man, okay? He's got $1 billion empire at stake with his drug dealing and gambling and everything else going on like that. All right, so he's got a lot to lose, right? So he says to himself, I've got to get rid of that SOB Bobby Kennedy. But if I kill him, Jack Kennedy will come after me with everything the government has. But if I have JFK killed, Bobby Kennedy will be powerless, and that's exactly what happened. So I hope that answers your question. He was a smart man, and he wasn't going to let revenge on Bobby Kennedy. He wanted to kill the SOB, but if he kills his brother, and it's interesting because I'll take it a step further. Go watch the photograph, I believe it's a photograph, of Joe Kennedy. When Ted Kennedy comes in the bedroom and tells Joe Kennedy, shows him the headline in the New York Times, JFK assassinated. Here's what he does. He knew that the double cross had killed his son. And Bobby Kennedy, when he found out from J. Edgar Hoover that JFK was dead, well, I thought they would get one of us, meaning Marcelo, but I thought it would be me. And RFK Jr., all right, he has said in many statements that his father knew it was Marcelo. And that's an interesting history with me and RFK Jr. Mark Wahlberg's production company is making a documentary out of Collateral Damage, or at least they're developing it, and we'll see what happens. But RFK Jr. got wind of what I said about his father in Collateral Damage, and he got a hold of the producers and said he was very, very upset. And so I made sure that he got a book and could look at it, and then I told him, I'll debate you any place you want to about what I've said. You can defend your father and all of that. Never heard from him. I sent him Fighting for Justice a couple weeks ago in Los Angeles. Same offer, and I offered for him to come to tonight. So far, I haven't heard from him. But they knew. I mean, they were smart people. Joe knew. Bobby Kennedy knew. You can't mess around with those mafia guys. And they did, and it ended up, in some ways, Bobby Kennedy's actions killed his brother. Go ahead, your second question.
okay, my second question is, if you want to commit a murder and kill someone, why will it choose a place which is open? There's all these people, and there's so many people taking pictures, and there's so many evidence that not only one person was shooting, there's shots coming from many places. So why will you kill someone who's the president of the United States in an open space like that?
This is where I get very emotional about this. Marilyn Monroe should have never been killed. JFK should have never been killed, and Dorothy, for sure, should have never been killed. And if you've been to Dealey Plaza, you know that it is basically a death trap. There's only one way in and one way out there. They set him up, okay? They set up Marilyn in terms of what was going on with her, and they set up Dorothy. None of them should have died. Those three people, look at the ages. Marilyn, 36. JFK, 45, right? 46. Dorothy, 52. All of them died. They should have never died. And that was a setup out there on Dealey Plaza. This woman who was here a little while ago, she took some camera photos, and then they confiscated her camera. There's so much calamity there and everything. Nobody really knows what happened. But it's all just really sad. Really bothers me. Sorry.
By the way, Joseph Kennedy's girlfriend was Gloria Swanson.
That's right.
And I was just telling it, amazing. She was on the ship, on a different part of the ship, and he kept his wife in another part of the ship. I can't help but think one of them knew about the other.
Joe Kennedy, you'll read about that in the book in terms of how they treated women. But with regard to the wives, basically in this neuroses book, part of the neuroses was they were supposed to have children and be ready to politic when they were running for office. That was their job. Nothing more. Over here. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Terry with an I, yes.
Terry with an I. Yes, well, I'm going to make a comment first. And I want everybody to know how honored I am to meet you. But I watched your Purdue University 2-hour thing on YouTube. And, you know, you talked about your life, your whole life, which I thought, man, this man can just go on and on and on. But anyway, you talked about how fortuitous you were and how things just fell in your lap. And, you know, you mentioned that a little bit tonight. Well, this whistleblower contacting you, or this guy that knew the the senator contacting you in February, I don't think Allen Library gets enough credit, because you said that he saw Dorothy Kilgallen's name, contacted you, and that particular video got has 4.3 million to date. And so
Okay,
I
well,
think we need to give Allen Library and Tom Keener a great big round of applause, because this has caused you to now write this 6th book, and
Well,
with this information.
Well, I mentioned
So-
their names, remember? I mentioned their names. There's a couple more. was
And there's also Ethel Merman's son, who contacted you
Oh, yeah.
after seeing an Allen Library video.
Well, there's a couple more.
So yeah,
couple
this
more.
this
There-
library is awesome.
There's I was born in Auburn, Indiana, and this guy watched the collateral damage one last year, and he got in touch with me, and he gave me information about the death scene of Dorothy Kilgallen. Why did they have the air conditioner on? And he gave me some information about that. And there was lipstick on her pajamas, or her bolero jacket she was wearing, some things about that. All right? That's 25 miles from where I was born. And he got in touch with me, Dr. Mathis. And it's continued on. And I hope I didn't underemphasize how, how much I feel toward Tom and Aaron and Kevin in terms of permitting me to be here. And I will bet you, Terry, that when this is up on their YouTube channel, on YouTube, I'll get more people who'll get in touch with me. And that has really helped with regard to all of my research, so I can't underestimate.
And I do have a question.
Okay.
I have a sister who lives in Florida, and I was talking to her tonight, and she's just bummed that she couldn't be here, because she loves Dorothy Kilgallen as much as I do, and we both have just loved how you fight for her from, you're her voice. But she asked me, ask Mark if some of the people you have been contacting, like the attorney generals of Texas, the ones in New York, wherever, are any of them listening to you right now? Have you? And you haven't heard from any of them, I don't think. Have you? So.
Well, here's been my my approach with regard to Dorothy. In 2016, when The Reporter Who Knew Too Much came out, I got in touch with the DA there. They promised me a thorough investigation of her death. They had a half-assed investigation and quit after about 8 or 9 months because it was too expensive. I then flew to New York and met with the police chief, Shea, of the police department, and shook his hand, and he promised they would give a full investigation of Dorothy's death. Well, they gave me an investigator to talk to, and then he wouldn't return my calls. With Marilyn Monroe's death, I sent a letter in my book about collateral damage to Gaston, the LA district attorney. Never heard from him. But that said, with the new evidence now showing how much more danger Dorothy was in as of 1965, I'm going to go after the new New York district attorney again. And if I have to, the police department and the attorney general there. I've got to get her reputation, the tarnished reputation, changed. And I'm going to keep trying to do that as long as I live. Thank you.
Mark, are you ever worried about your own safety?
Well, I've hit 77, so I feel very privileged to have done that. And Purdue, I might add, I grew up when I went to Purdue at that time, even though I was there a long time, but I grew up, and it's a very special honor that year before they said they wanted to archive my body of work, all my books and everything else, alongside Neil Armstrong and the aviator Amelia Earhart. And I thought they were kidding, frankly, because I was such a poor student and all that. But Purdue meant a lot to me, that's for sure. As far as safety, my safety, at times I've wondered about it. I've been awful tough on the Kennedys, and people still love the Kennedys. They still believe in Camelot. I made some comparisons with Joe Kennedy and the former President of the United States in collateral damage that people didn't like, but I thought they were appropriate. But you can't worry about that when you do this. Dorothy Kilgallen didn't worry about it enough, frankly. You might ask, why was she blabbing, about I'm gonna solve this case, I'm gonna do this, I'm putting this in a book for Random House. She was telling everybody what she was doing. She told her lawyer the night before, everybody, because she thought she was invincible. She was such a big, power. She underestimated the powerful people who were coming after her. But as far as I go, I must admit a couple times I remember about the guy the mafia guy in Philadelphia that had his car blown up. A couple times I've kind of wondered about turning on the car. But I can't be worried about that. I'm going to keep after the truth. But thanks for asking.
Questions, comments, protests? We've got a few more minutes. In the back?
You've written 6 books about the assassination and the Warren Commission, and Warren Commission was a sham. Allen Dulles was the first director of the CIA. Harry Truman appointed him.
Yeah.
And he was very influential in the Warren Commission, and how opportune it was for him to be on the inside forcing the lone gunman theory. Any thoughts on Allen Dulles and moving the Warren Commission forward?
Well, 2 things. I have a great photograph in the book. Allen Dulles was a little guy. He's standing beside LBJ at LBJ's ranch, and LBJ has on his cowboy boots. So it's kind of a laughable photograph of the two. What do you think when Allen Dulles was head of the CIA with the Kennedy administration? What do you think happened to him? He was fired.
Right. He had. I would guess that Allen Dulles had a pretty good motivation for getting both of the Kennedy boys aside.
Exactly. So they wanted people they could control. And another thing I didn't mention that Morris Wolf told me when he was at the hearings. Now you have to remember, I'm taking the reader this time right inside the Warren Commission hearings. That's never been done before. So there's a seat right there, and you're having a seat tonight. But Morris Wolf said to me, what I noticed was just when Cooper was going to send his letter of resignation, it says right in there, as you will read, what he was upset about is they didn't let him know when the witnesses were coming into the hearings. The staff investigated the JFK assassination. And why? Because LBJ, Warren, Hoover, they could control them. They couldn't control people like Cooper and some of the others. Cooper and it's Richard Russell, that dissent, they just lied to them that would be in there. That would have changed everything if it would have said Oswald alone, except that blank, 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 blank. So Allen Dulles, that LBJ didn't appoint him by accident. That was to keep the CIA out of it.
Absolutely not. He recruited a lot of the Nazi intelligentsia to come over and start working with us, and a lot of deception, a lot of lies. A lot of stuff going on, and he had a plot hatched to assassinate Joseph Stalin.
I'm not surprised.
He was a very deceptive and untrustworthy character. He was not a Boy Scout.
Thank you, sir.
Questions, comments, protests? Okay.
Yeah, just coincidence, I'm sure, but Arlen Specter was the one that came up with the magic bullet theory. And then Boggs was killed in an accident. He was probably the one that was the secret voice inside the commission. And then LBJ had a whole lot of problems. He had Billy Saul Estes. He had Bobby Baker, he had a hitman named Malcolm Wallace who was implicated in 8 murders in Texas. There's some guys that have a program, America's Untold Stories. And I've sent you a couple of copies on that, but I'll call you up after you
please?
get home this weekend and we'll talk about it.
Okay, good. That'd be great, Joe.
Thanks.
Arlen Specter's an interesting part of this. After Morris Wolf, and I can't emphasize the outstanding credentials this man has. After he left Senator Cooper at the Warren Commission, he went to Philadelphia and he was the assistant district attorney for Arlen Specter. So that whole connection is in there as well. It's a very small crowd with regard to that whole Warren Commission investigation because they wanted it that way. Just think about it, the investigation of JFK's assassination, it should have been in Dallas, okay? It should have been in Dallas, but it should have then been open to other investigations as well. But they couldn't let that happen. They could not let that happen.
Questions, comments, protests?
Yes, sir.
Understand there's a book now written by, I don't remember the man's name, but he's some crime dude on one of the news networks, and it's about the Ruby trial and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know if you're aware of it, and what do you think of it?
Well, here's what happened, and I'm sorry, I don't like to, object or badmouth to authors who have written about this. But Vincent Bugliosi, okay, the prosecutor of the Manson, wrote Reclaiming History. That's Distorting History, should have been the name of it. Vince and I knew each other from being on ESPN together. And so when I found out about Dorothy Kilgallen's research, I called him and I said, you're writing a book, I understand, about the JFK assassination. Here's what I found, and I'm going to send you my research, and I did. Oh, Mark, I'll put it in the book, no question about that. I got the book. Not a single word about Dorothy, because again, see, the Oswald alone conclusion. You can't let anything else come in that will object to that, just like they did with the Warren Commission. The guy you're talking about is Abrams, I believe a ABC reporter, all right? He wrote a book defending Jackie or something like that, about the whole thing with Ruby, that the reason he shot Oswald and everything was so that Jackie Kennedy wouldn't have to come back for any trials or anything else like that. Dorothy's not mentioned. Basically, he didn't do his research whatsoever. He doesn't know anything about the Warren Commission. He doesn't know about anything with regard to that. But he's another one of these journalists or authors who are looking for some peg to go ahead and write a new book of some sort. And it's really unfortunate because people read those. I hear from people all the time. Look at Gerald Posner. He's the first one who wrote Case Closed on the Oswald alone theory. That perpetuated everything. That's what the Warren Commission Oswald alone theory has done, perpetuated all these lies all these years. That's what the Sixth Floor Museum does, perpetuates all this. And it has really stopped an awful lot of qualified researchers from going forward because this Oswald alone conclusion is out there. I'm hoping that my book will maybe, perhaps, once and for all get rid of that, and there'll be really quality investigations of the Warren Commission as it should be.
Tell them how you can buy they can buy your book.
What's that?
Tell them how they can buy your book.
Well, I wouldn't buy it if I were you. I just watch this presentation. No, if you choose to do so, you can please go to independent bookstores if you can. We got to help them. They are having a really tough time. Obviously, the big daddy of selling books, they sell more than 90% of the books, unfortunately, in the world. Starts with A. You can go in there. They just discounted the book for some reason. But if you can, support the independent bookstores, but it's everywhere. My website is markshawbooks.com. My email is mshaw@yahoo. I answer every single email. It may take a while, but I do. And I will get back with you for sure. And
he will sign if you...
Oh, yes, that's the other thing. They didn't sell books here tonight, and that's just fine. If you buy a book and you want me to autograph it, send me an email. I'll give you an address. You can send it to me, and then I'll take care of the postage of sending it back to you. Be glad to.
By the way, I always wear a patriotic tie when we have a JFK presentation. to honor his service as Commander-in-Chief, but also his service in the United States Navy.
That's right. Absolutely.
I was just curious how old Morris Wolf is, and is he still living today? I know you talked to him in February.
Yeah, he's 87 years old, maybe 88. His health isn't the best. He's in Florida. At times we've talked about possibly him doing interviews and all of that, but I think that's very difficult for him. So I've tried to be Morris Wolf and promote him and the kind of man he was. And I will be ever grateful both to the Allen Library, but also to Morris for trusting me with this. I tried to develop a reputation when I was a criminal defense lawyer as somebody you could trust. And for whatever reason, Dudley out here, Allen, Catherine Lieberman, all these people have trusted me with their material, and it means an awful lot to me. And that's the only way that I've been able to have these breakthroughs with regard to new information in each one of the 6 books, but this is the final one.
Yeah.
Okay?
Oh,
Hold on, I got to bring you the mic.
I promised my wife, this is the final one. She's heard that before. Yes, sir.
For the first time, I saw the Zapruder film on YouTube a couple years ago. It's a nasty thing to look at. It's hard to watch, actually. Would you like to comment about what can be seen in that video, or what is occurring that is not filmed? Anything on that, assassins, locations, evidence, something like that?
If you don't mind, hold that microphone. If you don't mind, I'd like to know what you think of the Zapruder film.
Well, I was very nervous watching it. I stumbled upon it. I can't remember how.
Right.
I saw, and it was enhanced. It was clear. It was very sad to see. I saw reaching.
Do you think it was credible? Do you think it was credible?
I think it's credible, yes. I have read no books on this subject matter.
Wow.
Okay?
Thanks for coming.
This is why I'm here.
Thank you.
Okay? This is why I looked at that video, to get a little more.
Yeah.
I saw him reaching for his throat right as he's passing some obstruction, and then his head going this way, and
Yeah.
then,
Well, everybody has a different interpretation. One of the interpretations is that it's a bunch of baloney because it was enhanced or it was edited or whatever. I don't know. Dorothy never referred to it. I don't know if she knew about it at the time or whatever, or it was even available. I really don't know. But I think it's one of those situations, when I watch it, I feel like it's credible in terms of the fact that how he was killed seems reasonable to believe, at least, plausible for sure, that the bullets came from the front. You can dispute all that if you want to, but that seems to be. But again, here's where
you mean not from?
No. Here's where Hoover was so smart, see.
Is that the grassy knoll?
Remember what Dorothy found out from the chief of police in Dallas? When he heard the shots, he sent people to the overpass. That would be coming from this way. But Hoover was so smart, wasn't he? Okay. He must have gotten wind of what the injuries were to JFK in the White House in Parkland, right? So what did he do? Whisk that body off to Washington, D.C., where they could control the autopsy. And, there's no way to know exactly what they found, but that should have never happened. They just started controlling everything that was going to happen, and they controlled it from that day all the way through the Warren Commission and so on and so forth. So there was never going to be any question in people's minds that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone.
Okay, you've been writing since 2007 up to 2022. You've got good information, good sources.
Mm-hmm.
What makes you think the corrupt media is going to listen? If they want something covered up, they're going to cover it up. They're doing it now on everything.
They're more corrupt now.
Well, I don't know if they can be more corrupt than not looking at the exposing the Warren Commission, but it's sad. It really is. That's why so many people around the world, boy, we wish we had a reporter like Dorothy Kilgallen with her integrity. We wish we had Walter Cronkite back. We wish we had these people. See, they went out and found the facts. It wasn't politicized then. They gave us the facts. You know, this shows my age, of course. But in my day and age, you know how much news we had during the day? 1 hour, 5 to 6 in the afternoon. That was it. Now we got them 24 hours, and it's one-upsmanship. You know, they've got to come up with a brilliant new headline of some sort, and so on and so forth. We can't trust any of them anymore on both sides of the aisle. It's just ridiculous in a lot of ways. So that's why I say you've got to ask questions. For God's sakes, don't, if I find out you go to Wikipedia, I will beat you up. Wikipedia, anybody can go in there and put anything they want up to. That wasn't always like that, but it is now. And I get these emails from people, well, I looked on Wikipedia, Mr. Shaw, you're full of beans. Well, I might be, but I'm not going to be, it's not going to happen because of what's on Wikipedia. But it's sad and it's unfortunate. And I don't know if it's going to get any better. I'm very much of an optimist, but I don't know what the answer is. Yes, sir. Yes, Stuart.
I don't think it's going to get any better either. But in terms of trying to interpret the Zapruder film, I think it's impossible from just watching the film to try to pick out everything that's happening.
Right.
But if we look at all of the primary evidence, the best evidence, we have to account for a wound in the front of the president's throat. Dr. Kemp Clark testified to that immediately in a press conference. We have to account for the bullet hole in the president's jacket and dress shirt, 5 inches down from the collar and an inch to the right of the spine. We have to account for 3 different wounds in Governor Conley. We have to account for a bullet wound through the windshield of the limo. We've got to account for a bullet dent in the chrome between the 2 sun visors in the presidential limousine. We also have to account for the bullet that hit the curb on the south side of Main Street that hit Jim Teague in the cheek, either a shard of concrete or the bullet. All that has to be accounted for. That had to have come from more than one direction.
Not if you don't want it to.
Well, if you want to lie about it.
You see, if you don't want to.
The other thing we need to talk about is the connections between Lyndon Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover, or the fact that they were best friends, next door neighbors, cohorts in crime.
Yeah.
And also the fact that J. Edgar Hoover not only was blackmailing both of the Kennedys the entire time Jack Kennedy was in the White House, but the fact that the Kennedys also knew a few things about him.
Oh, yeah.
But he knew more about the Kennedys. Kennedy needed to get reelected because J. Edgar Hoover was going to turn 70 years old on January the 1st, 1965. And as soon as Kennedy is inaugurated for term number 2, he is gone, and he is no longer, as he called himself, the seat of government.
You have to know a little bit about Stewart here. He drove all the way down from Oklahoma today, which I appreciate, and brought some books and so on and so forth that way. He's a historian. I'm a historian. That's what you try to figure out. Now, he's talking about all those things that are evident on that film or seem to be. But if you don't, it's just like the woman said, again, as far as the media goes with regard to it, or those in power, if they say it's so, and if it's not, it's not. So you have to ask the questions and so on and so forth that way. There's some more startling things in the book. For instance, I don't know if you know that before JFK married Jackie, he was already married. And he never divorced. He was a bigamist when he married Jackie. That's a document that I found, and it's in the book. You have to know that there was quite a friendship between Joe Kennedy and J. Edgar Hoover. And I have a letter in there from J. Edgar Hoover from Joe Kennedy to J. Edgar Hoover. Summarize it. Hoover says, I think you should run, or Joe Kennedy said, I think you should run for president. And if you do, I will use all my financial backing to try to get you elected. Those are things you just can't make up that happened back then. Hoover and Frank Costello, who was a very close friend of Marcello's. Hoover and Costello were friends. Costello used to pay off J. Edgar Hoover's bets at the racetrack. There was an awful lot of corruption going on, but the king of corruption is at the Warren Commission, that's for sure.
2 last questions, and I'm going to let her answer one, but I'm going to ask one. Can you comment on Abraham Bolden?
Wow, boy, that'd take a while, wouldn't it?
We got the time.
Well, I'd be interested to know what you think of him.
Well, he was questioned the strategy and the security that the president was given.
Yeah.
And he questioned the efficacy of their processes, being in bars and not on their job and drunk and so forth and with girlfriends and so forth. Then all of a sudden he's thrown in jail. It just smells like a rat.
Well, here's what I found that was interesting. You know, it was maybe you know this, maybe you don't. Bobby Kennedy is the one who suggested that JFK, they open the top of the limousine for Dallas. I found it, again, this crowdsourcing. I can't remember if it was this presentation here or somewhere else. An architect in Florida got in touch with me. And he was working on a hotel in Miami at the time of the assassination. And he said JFK came through there and stayed at that hotel. And when he came from the report, the bubble was on there and all of that. And the security was just incredible. He said you couldn't move 3 feet without seeing a Secret Service agent. It was amazing. And so I was just, flabbergasted that when I looked at what they were doing in Dallas, the bubble top was off. There weren't as many Secret Service agents around. They had carefully had the route in Miami so that there was a wide open space and everything. And he's the first one that said to me, I don't know if you know, Mark, but Dealey Plaza going around there is a death trap and all of that. So it's interesting because that was 3 days before JFK was killed. Now, whether somebody had in mind killing in Miami, I don't know. But the security in Dallas, it wasn't even close to what it should have been for JFK. Again, the guy, anyway, yeah, okay.
By the way, the person who would have done the autopsy on Kennedy, had he been left here, had done hundreds and hundreds. And most of the autopsies he'd done were gunshot wounds from robberies and that kind of thing. So if he had been left here, it would have been a different story.
They couldn't let it happen. They just couldn't let that happen.
Mark, have you ever thought about, writing a letter to the President of the United States? Now, no, listen, I remember, I ain't talking about the one now, but Donald Trump had said he was going to open the investigation.
No,
And
never.
see, Donald Trump's not a politician. He don't have a dang thing to lose.
Let me correct you there, Terry, please, correct you there. One of the things that's happening is more corruption. This takes a while to get into, but I'm not going to give it much push. Maybe you know that in 1992, I believe it was George Bush Sr., there was the law passed that they had to reveal the rest of the JFK assassination documents. I think it was by 2017. It never happened. Now you go through all the presidents, including the former president you're talking about, and the current one. And in the book, when Biden came out at the first of the year with the reasons why, they used national security as the reason for,
I know.
okay, that's 60 years ago, right? But national security. But this one, as I wrote in my book by Biden, was ridiculous. It could cause problems with law enforcement. It could cause problems with foreign relations. I mean, these excuses were absolutely crazy. And so I lambasted Biden in the book, but he's not the first president that did
Right,
that.
but-
Just a second. Now, what are they hiding? I'd like to think that they're hiding the Warren Commission corruption in there. There's supposed to be another release of the documents in the 16th of this month. We'll see if that comes out. But believe me, Terry, I wouldn't be afraid to write to anybody, including the President of the United States. But what I am going to do is, when I get time, I've taken all the material that I've written in each of the books, and I've put it together in one document. And I have somebody who's going to help me get it to the chairman of the Judiciary Committee and ask them to reinvestigate the JFK assassination based on my research and 2 or 3 other individual's research that I believe is credible. I think something like that might have a shot. So
But, yeah.
that's something
and-
I'm going to do.
And so, I mean, a president does have the authority to open an investigation, and, yeah,
I
I'm
understand
so
that,
disappointed that
but
there
that's-
hasn't
but
been a
I'm gonna-
president.
I'm gonna
No
take it in that-
president
yeah.
would, you know,
I'm going to take
do
it in that direction and see if I can get some help. Thank you, Terry.
Thank y'all for coming. Oh, this man's got a question. Okay.
Oh, okay.
This is like the auction house. You don't put the hand up, you don't get a bid.
This means a lot to me that you're all sitting here and listening to this, so thank you very much.
After 2.5 hours.
Hope you can hear me. This is more of a comment. I happened to be in New Orleans going to school
Ah.
and got to know some very influential people. And I want to confer that Carlos Marcello ran everything. He was top man, and he's the one you better watch out for. And you mentioned Campisi. That was one of his lieutenants here in Dallas.
I'd like to get your name and talk to you about that if you don't mind,
Yeah.
if we
And-
could. You know, the JFK film, I'm not a fan of that film because Oliver Stone didn't do his research. And again, oh, by the way, do you think Dorothy Kilgallen was invited to testify before the Warren Commission, despite all of her, because of all the, Oswald file, and she wrote about 10 columns and everything? Absolutely not. They would never let her testify. Regard to Marcella, JFK the film. Well, they based that on Jim Garrison and all these other things Oliver Stone didn't. And I don't agree with his analysis at all because Dorothy wasn't involved. But there's a scene in there, if you may remember, where things could have changed. Garrison has his assistant district attorneys in a conference room, and he's talking to them. And they're talking about what they're going to do, and they finally land on Clay Shaw and go that direction. But one of the assistant district attorneys says, well, what about Carlos Marcello? And Garrison doesn't even answer him and goes on. He didn't want to mess around with Marcello at all. But if he had, you see, here's the interesting thing. Let's go back just quickly, if you don't mind, to what Morris Wolf said John Sherman Cooper told him. They know about Jack Ruby's connection to organized crime, but they don't care. If they had cared, then what would they have done? They'd looked into that connection to organized crime, and they then could have gone back and connected Ruby to Marcello, okay? And things would have been completely different there. They didn't want anything to do with that. They didn't want anything to do with that. History could have been changed in that situation too. Cooper, I think had it right, and Dorothy had it right, and she believed that the Warren Commission was as corrupt as could be, and she kept it. I asked Morris Wolf, "Why are you trusting me with this?" Well, I knew about Dorothy, and you defended Dorothy in your Allen Library presentation, so I know I can trust you. And I said, "Well, why didn't Cooper speak up, or why didn't you speak up before this?" He said, "I was loyal to Cooper, and Cooper was loyal to the commission." So for 60 years, that Warren Commission report's been out there, and hopefully maybe we can put a stop to it. We'll see.
LBJ, whether you liked him or loved him or hated him, he demanded everybody around him be 1,000% loyal.
That's right.
No questions asked. It was his way or the highway. I can say after reading this book, when I got to the section about Morris Wolf, when I got to the section about the connection between Ruby and Marcello, I couldn't put it down, and you cost me 2 nights of sleep. I couldn't put it down, literally.
Very nice. Thank
And
you.
so don't read it at 10 o'clock at night because you won't get any sleep. Read it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was something. I encourage you to go to his website, get a copy. He'll sign it for you and send it to you to your house. Thank y'all for coming.
Thank you so much.